again, baseball lovers. Jason here with you for a new episode, our third episode of our ongoing RAB podcast series called A Fan's Journey, Loving the Game. And really excited about this. I look forward to recording this now every week because it's been a lot of fun for myself, walking back through my own fandom and thinking about the past and some great memories. And also last week on episode 2, we were able to share 3 stories from our listeners and our followers of our Facebook page. So thank you guys for sending those in. And I've got more. I've got an email full of more stories to share. So we'll get back to sharing some of those on next week's episode. And keep sending them. I got some new ones this week and just want you guys to keep sending them. This series is going to be ongoing for a good while into the off season. So need all the stories and want all the stories you guys can send us, because really having a blast connecting through the game of baseball with people that I've never met. But that was really the whole point of this. And the point of the Facebook page was to connect with other baseball lovers, no matter where your fandom lies. We've got fans from all 30 teams on our page, and just exciting to connect with them and talk to them and joke around. And if you don't take it too seriously, some lighthearted, back and forth, not really trash talk, but some lighthearted stuff. So thank you again for everybody that's sending a story, and your story will get on one way or the other. We're going to read them all. And thanks to all those who've already sent. And please send them. You send your own personal story. And I get some emails asking me what kind of stories we're looking for. And honestly, anything to do with your baseball fandom is all we're looking for. It can be a memory of, watching a game with family. It can be your story, your personal story of how you became a baseball fan. A great memory of attending a game or being at a World Series game, whatever it is. That's really up to you guys. We want all your stories that have to do with baseball. So send those to baseballromantic77@gmail.com, and I will get those and compile them. And we're going to, like I said, we share them every other week. So this is episode 3. If you haven't watched, or actually you haven't watched episodes 1 or 2, because this is the first episode in this series that I'm putting on YouTube with video. They've been available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So if you want to get caught up on episodes 1 and 2, please check out your favorite podcast platform. Apple Podcasts, super popular with our listeners, at Spotify, and you can get caught up on those 2 episodes. And then this one here on YouTube, if you're watching the video, you can, from here on out, I'll put them on YouTube just like we do our regular RAB podcast series with my co-hosts Nico and Bruce. And if you're not familiar with that, that's where we're just a trio of baseball lovers who like to talk about the game, and we kind of review what's going on in the current game. So our last episode, actually, we took a look at the World Series, obviously, as it starts. As I record this episode, it's already 2 games in, and it's tied at 1, heading to LA for game 3. So check out our World Series preview episode. We also take a look back at what happened in the League Championship Series, that amazing 7-game series with the Mariners and the Blue Jays, and of course, the quick series as the Dodgers swept the Brewers in 4. But check that out. Also available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. So here we are, episode 3 now. Again, if you're catching up, episode 1, I walked through my fandom from its beginning in the 80s as a kid, watching the Braves with my grandparents on TBS. And that's, I'm sure, a very common story. I know it is, because I talked to a lot of Braves fans who that's the way their fandom was born. And I've talked to a lot of people from across the country who became Braves fans because they were on TBS. And of course, the Cubs were on WGN. So there are a lot of Braves and Cubs fans out there in some weird places, just because you could watch those 2 teams nearly every night in the 80s and 90s, no matter where you're at. So they were in your living rooms, the great Braves broadcasters that I talked about in the 80s who they felt like uncles, because they were in our living rooms every night telling great stories, teaching me about the game. And we'll do a whole episode on that group of characters. My favorite, Skip Carey, but of course, Pete Van Wieren, Ernie Johnson, Don Sutton, later on Joe Simpson. So, and Joe's still part of the Braves radio broadcast to this day. So that'll be a whole episode to itself, because those guys were super important in my development as a fan, and the reason I love the game so much, and listening to it on radio, which we'll talk about in this current episode as well. So as we move into the 90s, the Braves have been perennial losers since I became a fan. They did have a couple of good years in the early 80s when I was too young to really understand what was going on. But since I really became a knowledgeable baseball fan and understood what was going on, the Braves had finished at or close to last in their division. And the Braves back then, by the way, and this has been a fun topic on our Facebook page when I post old logos from the past. The Braves were in the NL West in the 80s and 90s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And how they came to be in the NL West is a little bit of a different story that we won't delve into. It has something to do with Cubs and Cardinals not wanting to be broken up. But the Braves ended up in the NL West after they moved from Milwaukee, and the divisions were started in 1969. So the Braves were paired up with the Reds, the Astros, the Padres, the Giants, and the Dodgers. I believe I got everybody there. So that was the NL West back then. And so going into 1990, of course, the Reds were the big story. They won the World Series. They upset the A's in 1990. Oakland had made 3 straight World Series appearances and came away with only the 1 World Series title in '89, defeating San Francisco. But the Reds reversed it and swept the A's in 1990 to win the World Series. So hitting 1991, the Braves were not still, I remember pretty vividly because I was into all the preseason, spring training. I was reading magazines. Back then there was no internet, so it was magazines, it was TV shows, it was radio shows. And the Braves were, I think there was a feeling the Braves would be better than the last several years when they finished last or close to last. But I don't think anybody saw what was coming in 1991. I certainly didn't. Most Braves fans I knew didn't. I myself was entering my high school years, 9th grade, as a 14-year-old. So all the things that you're going through as a 14-year-old teenager, and self-confidence issues and things like that. And the Braves were still my kind of escape. They were something that I knew. They were comfortable, and I knew I could go home every night during the spring and summer and watch the Atlanta Braves, no matter what was going on outside my world in that time. So I was very blessed, very fortunate to grow up in a wonderful household, a great childhood, great parents. I talked a lot about my grandparents already, and we'll continue to talk about how great they were, teaching me the game and teaching me about life and just how to be a good person. Most importantly, teaching me about God and family and all the things that really matter. And baseball was a big part of that, and it connected us. And I mentioned in episode 1, and this was about the same time at 14, probably that summer, where me and my grandfather connected on a higher level that we'd never really connected before, going bass fishing. He was a huge bass fisherman. He loved it. And I remember as a kid, seeing him come home. I'd be at my grandparents' house. He would come home with his buddies, and they had a cooler full of bass. And I just thought it was, super exciting and cool to see that. But and my uncle, who still lived at home at this point, I talked about in episode 1 as well, Clay, who was about 16 years older than I am. So he was kind of like a big brother. And Clay helped me really develop my football fandom, but he was also a Braves fan, is also a Braves fan. He still is. And they would go fishing, and I was kind of left out when I was young. They were afraid I would, freak out on the boat. And my granddad had this rule about there was no way I was going fishing until on the boat at least, until I knew how to swim. And so I had to learn how to swim. It took me a while. I was a little older than I should have been when I did that. But so finally, summer of 91, I was 14, and him and Clay decided to take me on my first bass fishing trip. And as fate would have it, during that trip on the boat, I did manage to hook myself in the hand pretty substantially. The barb went through my hand about right here, and it hurt like the dickens. And of course, my granddaddy had to get his pliers and kind of pull it back through, and that hurt. And my grandfather just knew, and my uncle both, they told me this later. They just knew that was probably the end of my bass fishing time. I would never want to go back. But something else happened on that trip. I caught 2 bass. And if you've never been bass fishing, and especially if you've never done topwater fishing, or if you have and you know what I'm talking about, there's nothing like topwater bass fishing, and you're pulling that lure across the water, and all of a sudden there's an explosion out of the water, and the bass grabs it, and you set the hook, and you fight the bass and you get him to the boat. That's an adrenaline rush, especially for a 14-year-old, that it's hard to describe. And so I caught 2 that day, and they were not monsters, but they were good enough size that it was fun. And I was, pardon the pun, hooked in a good way. I really enjoyed it. I was super excited, and I forgot all about the injury to the hand. I was just ready to go bass fishing again. And from that point on, in my young teenage years and into my 20s, I was super excited to go bass fishing anytime. Ended up having a great friend who'll come up later in this podcast who was also a big bass fisherman and still is to this day. I kind of walked away from it a little bit after I had kids, but I would still love to go today. Like it's still in my blood, just don't get to go as often. But from 14 to about 22, 23, it really was a big part, almost as big a part of my life as baseball and sports. So really that just sets the background again for, one of the great things about 1991. And most people, if you're not a Braves fan, you weren't around then, or if you're a younger Braves fan, the Braves didn't just come out like gangbusters that year and start beating everybody. They kind of 500-ish around the first half of the season. The Dodgers were the team in the NL West that year that was supposed to dominate and really win that division. They were the favorite, and they were playing like it. And the Braves were this young upstart team. The Dodgers had some really veteran guys on it. I remember specifically Brett Butler. I remember Darryl Strawberry, of course, former Met, who was on that Dodgers team. And Darryl even talked a little trash about the Braves being too young for this pennant race. So, it was just this fun atmosphere, though, as a Braves fan, to see us not be terrible, to actually see that we could win a few games. And so really I hate to say you're happy with that, but you kind of were happy with that at the time. Just not being terrible. So, and I was looking here, I had it pulled up and I think I just accidentally got out of it, but I had the Braves starting lineup from that season. Let me see if I can get it back while I still talk here. There it is. So the Braves starting lineup for opening day, and ironically, they opened up that year at home versus the Dodgers at Fulton County Stadium on April 10th, 1991. So you Braves fans or anybody from that era, see if you recognize a few of these names from that day in 1991, opening day in Atlanta. The Braves leadoff man was none other than, drum roll please, Deion Sanders. How about that? I know a lot of young folks know Deion as a head coach at Colorado now, but Deion had a illustrious NFL career, college football career, NFL career, and was also able to cross over and played pretty good baseball. He wasn't going to be a Hall of Fame baseball player, but he wasn't bad. He was an athlete all the way around. So he led off, played left field. Second base, batting second was Jeff Treadway. Jeff was a very consistent guy for the Braves over the years. Never spectacular, but very consistent. Ron Gant, one of those young players I mentioned earlier in center field. Gant brought speed and power. Dave Justice in right. I think most people know Dave. He ended up being one of the Braves' premier power hitters and had a pretty big home run coming up in a few years that we'll talk about. Maybe not in this episode, but definitely coming up. Then Sid Bream, who I mentioned had just joined the Braves from the Pirates at first base, a veteran presence. And right behind him, another veteran presence in Terry Pendleton. He was playing third base for Atlanta, coming over from the Cardinals. And then at catcher was Mike Heath. It's probably not the name most Braves fans will remember, as Greg Olson would get most of the accolades at catcher in 1991. At shortstop, the minute but very effective Rafael Belliard. If you don't know Belliard, if you're not from that period of time, you should look him up. A small guy, really tiny guy, but he could field it, he could pick it, he could throw it. Not a great hitter, but Rafi could throw it and field it. A really good shortstop. And then starting pitcher that day was John Smoltz. So Smoltz had come over in a trade with the Tigers. And so Smoltz would get them started in 1991. So just a walk down memory lane there. And if you're curious, just for those that might be listening that aren't Braves fans and maybe some Dodger fans that listen, the Dodgers starting lineup of the day was Brett Butler, who I just mentioned, in center field, followed by Juan Samuel at second, Darryl Strawberry in right, Eddie Murray, the great switch hitting Eddie Murray, who's very popular on our page, first base. Cal Daniels was in left, batting fifth. Lenny Harris was at third, batting sixth. Mike Scioscia, future Angels manager, catching at seventh. And then Alfredo Griffin was at short, batting eighth. And Tim Belcher was your starting pitcher. And the Dodgers would win that day 6-4 over Atlanta, pounding out 10 hits to the Braves 5. So Smoltz took the loss. Belcher got the win. So just a little trip down memory lane there for you to set this up. But 1991, Like I said, the fishing was a big part of it. The other thing that I didn't talk a lot about in the first episode that's really important. I talked about the Braves broadcasters and watching them on TBS, but back then the Braves broadcasters would also they would half the game up. So you'd have a duo on TV for 5 innings or so, 5.5 innings maybe, and then you'd have a two more of that same broadcast team. So you might have Skip Carey and Ernie Johnson on TV for the first 5.5, and in the meantime, Pete Van Wieren and Don Sutton or whoever the other partner was at the time would do the radio side, and then they would switch. So you would get all four on TV split and all four on radio. And radio would become super important to me for various reasons. One, you just like to listen to those guys. They were your hometown guys. They were your guys that were pulling for the same team you were. They told great stories. They were funny, especially Skip Carey, very dry sense of humor. I talked about in episode 1. Loved listening to those guys. So there were times you just wanted to hear the radio. And there were a few games back then, not many, but there were a few games that just for whatever reason were not televised by TBS. And usually the only way you could find them was on the radio. They usually weren't on another station back then. So we would listen to those games. And then of course I tie that into the fishing subject because on our way home from those fishing trips in the late afternoon, a lot of times the Braves would be starting up and we would listen to them on the way back in my grandfather's truck, listen to the Braves and listen to those guys. And I think, honestly, looking back on it, my granddaddy, I talked about this in episode 1 too, but he wasn't super. I don't think he was super concerned with winning and losing, whether the Braves won or lost. Like I think he enjoyed it when they won, and I think he was happy when they won. Maybe more for me and my uncle and my grandmother, who were kind of more into the winning and losing part of it. But I think he really his biggest joy was listening to those guys, and I think Skip Carey in particular was the one that he got a kick out of because Skip had an edge to him. He didn't like a lot of BS, and so Skip was really funny. I know a lot of Braves fans will remember this. He was really funny when they had a rain delay, and Skip would have a call-in show, and fans would call in with some stupid questions, and Skip never hid his disappointment or disgust at some of the questions that were asked. So that was always a good time. The rain delay shows. I know a lot of Braves fans my age and older remember those, and just a funny side note there. Usually with the rain delays, we'd be watching reruns on TBS of Hogan's Heroes or Andy Griffith. I Love Lucy, one of those classic shows that my grandparents also raised me on and that they love so much. So 91, as I mentioned earlier, we'll get back on track here. The Braves get to halfway through the season, 500-ish. They don't appear to be contenders, but they're better than normal. I mean, 500 for the Braves would be like, an amazing feat at that point because you're so used to being in last place, you're so used to losing that you'll definitely take 500. You definitely take that. So we get to the All-Star breakish, and you're feeling good about just being there. You're not really at this point winning the division. And back then, remember, kids, you had to win your division to go to the playoffs. There were only the NL East and the NL West, or AL East and AL West, and the two division winners would play each other in the league championship series, and the winner of that would go to the World Series. So there was no wild card. There was no other way to get into the playoffs other than winning your division, and that's why really celebrating that. And this came up on our last podcast episode. If you go listen to it, our last RAB podcast with me and Nico, where I talked about the tradition now, or whatever you want to call it, of teams celebrating every single step they get through in the playoffs. And I find it a little odd. I'm not saying I'm against it necessarily. You should celebrate winning, but they celebrate when they clinch the division or a playoff spot. They celebrate winning the wild card series. They celebrate with champagne winning the division series. Then they celebrate the league championship series, and that's fine. It just seems a little odd for those of us, I think, who grew up in this era where you did that because only 4 teams got to go to the postseason, and it was really an accomplishment to win that division and win the pennant. And just seems like a little strange now, especially for teams like currently the Dodgers, the Phillies, the Yankees, teams that are expected to win and expected to be in the championship series or the World Series, celebrating every step of the way. But that's another subject. You can check that out on our YouTube channel and our last REB podcast episode where we're previewing the World Series. I'm trying to look up the standings for about mid-year here. I got my handy baseball reference page. So right around the All-Star break, the Braves were 41-40. So like I said, pretty much 500. They were actually in third place at this point in the West. They were 7.5 games behind the first place Dodgers and 2.5 behind the second place and defending World Series champion Reds. So, again, to be in third place as a Braves fan, you would take that. And it was a lot of fun to watch this team. They were these young kids, the Gants, the Justices, and then the veteran presence that was added by Bream and Pendleton, big hits, walk-offs. Starting to see the pitching staff, the young, Tommy Glavine finding his way. Steve Avery was a big part of that season. I know a lot of people maybe they don't remember exactly how things went. Greg Maddux wasn't there yet. Maddux came to the Braves in 93. So 91, 92, the Braves made the World Series without Greg Maddux. And so he came over in 93. But yeah, 91, it was Smoltz, it was Glavine, it was Steve Avery. It was the veteran Charlie Leibrandt, who had been in the World Series with the Royals. Just a lot of kind of a mix of experience there and youth. And Steve Avery was a big part of that team. I know a lot of Braves fans probably remember Steve. He would play a vital role in the NLCS, but he was good throughout that season for Atlanta. So we get to second half of the season, and just I can recap the whole season, but most Braves fans, of course, know how this ended. The Braves were in last place, by the way, in 1990. So themselves and the Twins were about to do something in 1991 that had never been done before. And that's go worst to first and win the division. So the worst team in the divisions in their respective divisions in 1990. And in 1991, they both won their division and ended up winning their championship series to go to the World Series and face each other. That World Series could probably do its own entire episode. It was epic. It was amazing. It didn't come out the way Braves fans wanted it to, but it's not a series I look back on and really, regret like, oh, the Braves, they certainly could have won that series. It was a very even matchup with the Twins. And back then, home field advantage was a back and forth deal. 1 year it's national, 1 year it's American. They just traded out. It wasn't decided by record. Just every other year, it was luck of the draw. Happened to be that year was the Twins. The American League had home field advantage, and so the Twins and the Metrodome, which was a big advantage back then because, again, no interleague play. So most National League players had not played in the Metrodome, and if they had, it had been very limited experience. So no interleague, so you got to deal with a kind of a raucous crowd there, loud, and the ceiling at the Metrodome was very white, and teams that didn't play there often would often lose balls in the lights, not being able to see it against that white background. So it was a big advantage for the Twins, and luckily for them, games 6 and 7 after the Braves had taken a 3-2 lead were in Minnesota. But I want to focus more, and we'll talk more about that World Series, but real quick, one of the great stories or one of the great memories I have of that summer, the pennant race between the Braves and Dodgers. Once the Braves kind of hit their stride in the second half of the season and made a race out of it, they passed the Reds night after night, experiencing this for the first time as a baseball fan. Your own team in the pennant race every single night. You're wondering about, you're watching your game and you're hoping for a win. At the same time, you're watching that scoreboard and you're watching to see if the Dodgers lost, right? And it was just, if you experienced it, you remember. It was there. I don't think there's been a pennant race quite like it. 93 was really good, Braves and Giants. The Braves had to haul down the Giants after being in a big deficit that year. But there was something special about 91, at least for Braves fans, because you just didn't expect it. It wasn't expected at all. And the Dodgers kind of had this air about them. They weren't, I wouldn't say cocky, but they were confident. Like I said, Darryl Strawberry had talked a little bit of trash about the Braves being too young, and the Dodgers really weren't worried about them. So that set up some absolutely epic battles between Braves and Dodgers. They played each other a good bit back then because they were in the same division. There was no balanced schedule. And so when they played each other, it was just these epic clashes where it was like postseason baseball in July, August, and September. I mean, it was just, you're hanging on every pitch. It was just epic. And so they went back and forth down to the wire. The Braves would win, the Dodgers would lose, and the Braves would be a half game up, and then the Braves would lose, and the Dodgers would win, and the Dodgers would be a half game up, and then they would play each other. And I think, I remember 2 series in particular. In Atlanta, the Braves took 2 out of 3, but then they'd go to LA and the Dodgers took 2 out of 3. It was just back and forth. Neither team could build a lead in the division. And the memory I have that's so vivid of this time is I'm 14, and my parents weren't super strict, but they wanted me to go to bed at a decent time. And by the time this pennant race is really winding down in September, we're back in school, and so I was not supposed to stay up late. And the Braves being in the NL West, those Braves Dodger games that were on the coast, or anytime the Dodgers were playing at home, or if they were playing the Padres or the Giants, which they did often because they're all in the same division, those games wouldn't start till 9:30 my time. We were in the Central Time Zone, and so by the time those games were over, it was pushing midnight, and my mom just wasn't going to allow it. I couldn't sit up and watch those games if they were on TV. And when the Braves played out there, I couldn't watch them. So back then, children, no internet, again, no phones to look at, lying in the bed. So I had a Sony Walkman. I'm sure everybody remembers those from my time. Small radios and headphones. And I would get that out and tune in to the Braves radio network and listen to the games that were on the West Coast. And I would be in my bed when I was supposed to be sleeping, and fist pumping in the air in my bed, just excited when the Braves did something right. And I was also back then, I don't know what weird kind of radio signals you could get on AM. I think you still can, but I could pick up Dodger games and Giants games on AM radio, and I would listen to, if the Dodgers were playing somebody else, if I could get that game, I would listen to it and pull for the other team. And these were just magical moments as a 14-year-old to be sitting in your room, in your bed, supposed to be sleeping. Mom probably knew what I was doing, but she let go. But, and if I somehow didn't make it through a game, didn't know, they couldn't sit up, and maybe I fell asleep. First thing I would do in the morning while I'm getting ready for school, turn the radio on, and one of the local radio stations I really liked back then, a rock and roll station. The DJ was a Braves fan, and he would always update everybody on how things went the night before, if the Braves won, if the Dodgers lost. And you just lived this for really a month and a half, 2 months, the last, August, September. You lived it every day. Who are the Dodgers playing tonight? Who are the Braves playing? And the second to last day of the season, the Braves finally, they had played a series with the Dodgers where they lost 2 out of 3, and then I think they went and they lost 2 out of 3 to Cincinnati, and then they won 8 straight. This is right at the end of the year, right? Second half of September. They had no more games left with the Dodgers, but they won 8 consecutive games after that, and the Dodgers couldn't keep up. And on the second to last day of the season, the Braves won their game against the Astros, and the Giants did the Braves a favor and beat the Dodgers that day. It was a Saturday. I remember it very well. I remember the Braves had won their game, and the Dodgers game wasn't quite over. They were losing, and the Braves players stayed on the field after their win and watched the end of the Dodgers-Giants game on the big screen in the Atlanta Fulton County Stadium. And, of course, we were watching it and just going nuts as the Dodgers lost and celebrated that first division title as a Braves fan. Greg Olson jumping into John Smoltz's arms after the Braves had clinched their game sticks with you as a great memory. And just there were so many memories of that 1991 season. I couldn't possibly ever get through all of them. I remember an epic comeback against the Reds on the road where they were down, I want to say 6 or 7-0, and they came back. I mean, there were just so many moments that season. And so they won the division. And I mean, again, cool, crisp autumn day, and watching it happen. They were at home. The Braves were at home, so they got to celebrate at home. And the Giants, of course, I remember the Giants or the Braves had shipped the Giants some tomahawks, some foam tomahawks. That was, of course, a big thing, doing the tomahawk chop for the Braves. And a lot of the Giants fans, because, of course, there's no love lost between the Giants and Dodgers. A lot of the Giants fans were chopping with tomahawks. And so the Giants did us a favor in that series. And the Braves clinched and went to the National League Championship Series against the favored, of course, Pittsburgh Pirates. The Pirates had lost to the Reds in the NLCS the year before. They had Barry Bonds, they had Andy Van Slyke, they had Doug Drabeck, Jose Lean, just a really good team. The early 90s Pirates and the mid to late 90s Indians are two two ball clubs that you can't believe that neither one of them got a World Series during that time. And the Pirates didn't even get to go to a World Series thanks to the Braves, really. In both 91 and 92. But 91, Braves go into the NLCS. They're underdogs. And, once you get there, you want to win. But I still don't remember thinking, I think as a Braves fan, you're pretty happy just being in the postseason. I think there's probably a feeling of, we're glad to be here. You'd love to win, but glad to be here. And so, I don't remember. I remember being tense. I remember being, once you get into postseason baseball, even today, you guys know how tense it is when your team's playing in those games. But the Braves would eventually get down 3-2, going back to Pittsburgh for games 6 and 7. So the old Three Rivers Stadium in Pittsburgh, the Pirates got it all set up. All they got to do is win one home game. But in game 6, Steve Avery, who I mentioned earlier, delivered with a magnificent performance for Atlanta. And I believe they won that game 1-0. So very tense. And the Braves forced a game 7. And in game 7, John Smoltz started to build his postseason legacy. He would become known as delivering big time in the postseason for Atlanta. And he would duel with Doug Drabeck, and the Braves would come out on top. Brian Hunter hit a big home run in that game, and Atlanta would go on the road and win both games 6 and 7, break the Pirates' hearts, and advance to that worst to first World Series with the Twins. And, of course, that series full of memories. Kirby Puckett's game 6 home run to walk it off and force a game 7 after the Braves had gone up 3-2 on the Twins. And then game 7's incredible pitching duel between Jack Morris and John Smoltz that went to extra innings before the Twins were able to get a 1-0 win. So many memories, good and bad. But, again, I don't look at 1991, the World Series, as a failure so much as just, hey, the Twins were very evenly matched, and they had the home field, and they beat them. And but to go to the World Series, win the division, win the National League, with everything you'd been through as a Braves fan to that point, it was worth it. So all that to really get back to the theme of all this, and that is, it made me love baseball even more. The absolute cinema of postseason baseball, of watching that pennant race down to the wire every day, checking the scores, listening on the radio in my bed, all the things coming together. And then that fall, starting high school, probably helped ease into high school a little more. And you saw a lot of Braves hats at school. And because there's, obviously in the South and deep South where I grew up, a lot of Braves fans. And my buddies in particular, every day being excited to share our thoughts on the games the night before and getting to the NLCS and the World Series, just meshing all that together with high school and friends, and experiencing a lot of that with my grandparents as well, being there during the National League Championship Series. I was with them when the Braves clinched that to go to the World Series. I remember vividly watching game 1 of the World Series at their house. My uncle was still there. He had back then what would be considered a big screen TV. It was not flat screen. I'm sure a lot of you remember the big TVs, like heavy. This thing was one of the heaviest things I've ever put my hands on. And he had gotten it just before the playoffs started. So we watched game 1 in Minnesota of that series on that big TV. So just, all these memories. And that's why I do this. That's why I wanted to do this episode, these shows, this series, connect with you guys, because I think there's a lot of Braves fans out there that share a lot of these same memories, and I want to be able to connect with you guys, all of you, not just Braves fans. Hopefully fans from all teams have these memories of watching the games, experiencing the games in different ways. Radio, I know a lot of people love the radio because they talk about their own hometown radio broadcaster from their childhood. So please share those stories as we wrap up episode 3 here. My plea to you is to keep sharing. I've got several in the tank to share in the next episode, and probably enough for the one after that. But I want to keep this going. I want to keep sharing your stories and connecting with you guys. They're wonderful stories so far. I love reading them, and I'll enjoy reading them on the air next week. So episode 4 will be made up mostly of listener stories that you've sent in. Probably talk a little more about that 1991 World Series before we jump into 92, 93, 94 in the next episode, or the one after that. It's episode 5. And then plan on spending one full episode on the 1995 World Series. But the next episode where we're talking about my fandom will unfortunately incorporate some more bad memories or losing memories of the World Series, and then also the strike of 1994. We'll get into that and how that affected me and how I looked at that. A lot of people walked away from baseball after that strike and didn't come back, at least for a while. And I think there are people that probably never came back after that. So we'll delve into that. But the next episode will be mostly devoted to you guys. So send us those stories. Again, send those to baseballromantic77@gmail.com. And I will get those, and I'm compiling them. Like I said, I got several, but I need more. So keep sending them. People ask me, what do you want me to send? What kind of story? Anything related to baseball that is important to you. A great memory with a family member, a great memory of a game you went to or watched, or your team winning the World Series, or whatever it was. Definitely want to hear those stories and get them on the air. So we'll get them on. I promise, if you send a story, we're going to read it on the show. This series is going to go on for a while. I got one fan who wrote in who has a great story to tell, and we're going to get him actually on the show. So if you're interested in being on the show also and talking about it and kind of giving your story in your own words, then let me know when you email me your story. Just tell me, hey, I'd be interested in doing this with you on the show. And I'll be glad to get you on here and interview you, and we'll talk about it and let you share it in your own words. So just let me know in the email. Also, make sure, as I mentioned, you're checking out the RAB podcast with myself, Nico, and Bruce as we talk about the current season and now, of course, the postseason. So the last episode we did was our takes on the League Championship Series, how those came out, and looking ahead at the World Series. And we are now 2 games into the World Series. So, of course, we'll have a wrap-up episode after it's all said and done and a champion is crowned, looking back on the whole season as well, the whole 2025 season, and a little look ahead at 2026. So, again, all this is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and now, starting with this episode, you can get the Fans Journey series on YouTube. The REB podcast has always been on YouTube, but I was not putting these on YouTube. They are now. So we've got video with this one of my ugly mug here giving you these stories, but check us out on any of those platforms. Check out our line of merchandise on teepublic.com. That's TEE public.com, and you can search Romantic About Baseball once you're there. We also post the links periodically on our Facebook page, Romantic About Baseball. And we got just a line of unique merchandise themed from the Romantic About Baseball theme. So check that out and support what we do. We appreciate everybody who's already supporting us. We have subscribers on Facebook, 99 cents a month. We would love to have you. You can join our special subscribers only group, and that's limited to just people who subscribe, so serious baseball fans. So you can do that on Facebook. If you go to our Facebook homepage, there's a subscribe button. You can do that there for 99 cents a month. You can subscribe, of course, to this YouTube channel if you're watching us on YouTube here, and it's absolutely free. All you do is hit subscribe, and our videos will show up for you. So please support us by doing that. You can also support us by buying merch from TeePublic as we continue to try to grow this thing. And you can also support us. If you go to our Facebook page, we post a link daily to the Wander Club. The Wander Club, if you're not familiar, is this awesome business that they create tokens for. They do it for a lot of things, national parks, different places around the world. But they got ballpark tokens. My wife and I are collecting them as we chase down all the ballparks. And so every time you visit a new ballpark, you get this token for that ballpark, and you can put it on. We've got the little keychain that you can clip to your backpack. And it's just a great way to commemorate your trips. And like I said, you can do that for national parks, states. I think they have overseas locations, and of course the ballparks. So check that out, the Wander Club, WANDER, Wander Club. But please go to our Facebook page and find the link that we post and use that, and that'll help us get credit for doing business with them. Great organization. They're doing some good work there. So thank you guys for tuning in for episode 3 of A Fan's Journey. This is just cathartic for me to go through all this. I love doing this, and I love connecting with you guys. So please continue to support us. Thank you again for all that you do to support our Facebook page and our different platforms. And we'll be back next week with some of your stories. And in the meantime, we'll see you at the ballpark. See you guys.